Welcome back and welcome back to the Horror Master YouTube channel, and I'm back. I know I've been gone for a while, but thankfully I have returned. I haven't gone anywhere, just have to fix some stuff in my personal life, but regardless, I am back with another video, and of course I'm continuing with my controversial album series, which the last three episodes I did probably last month were really good receptions, and I thank you all so much for giving a like, sharing it with everybody. I really appreciate all that, guys. You have no idea, but this series is gonna be a series that I wanted to keep on going because it's just the tip of the iceberg. I haven't even touched upon like some more obscure album covers that hopefully we can get to eventually. And there's an album cover you want me to discuss, let me know down in the comments. I really want to know all you guys' opinions and all that. But regardless, let's get into today's video. So on episode number 4, we're gonna be talking about a album cover that at the time was still considered controversial, and as time has gone on, it has kind of grown into a lore of its own, regardless because of what happened, of course, in those events. Of course, I am talking about the first EP released by the Norwegian black metal band Bersum, and of course, the EP in question is called Aske, released on March 10, 1993 by Deadlight Silence Productions. So, if you're not a fan of Bersum or don't know who Bersum are, Bersum is a one-man project, Norwegian black metal project created by, of course, Varg Vikernes, aka Griffith Grishnak, aka Count Grishnak, for all you Norwegians who like to be more specific on the name. But regardless, Burzum is one of those bands that, for a lot of people, especially in the kind of depressive, suicidal black metal community, regardless, probably like the godfather of that sound with bands like Shiny and Saster, amongst others. Those albums, like the probably first three albums, out of which a lot of them kind of gave way for kind of for depressive, suicidal black metal bands or some atmospheric black metal bands, kind of a template of what to do and create their own. But of course, if you're a Norwegian black metal fan and know what Burzum is, of course you know this is something that you've heard a million times. But this is for some people who are not familiar with this album cover, not familiar with the lore, because once you get into the lore of this album cover, how it all started, it's kind of a bit of a shocking thing, which I've talked about so many times in the Orphan podcast. If you want to watch those videos on the Norwegian black metal scene or the original metal, or recently what I've talked about with some of the members from Blood Red Throne about how they grew up during this time in Norway. I really recommend y'all to watch those videos to get more of an inside depth into those perspectives. But we're just gonna be talking about the album cover and kind of the events that led to this infamous album cover and why I consider it a really controversial album cover. So by this time, the album cover has already been put up there. So to give a kind of a bit of backstory, Varg Vikernes, like I mentioned before, very influential guy in the Norwegian black metal scene. But at this time, there was beginning to kind of be a sort of a conflict in between the Black Circle, which consists of members like Euronymous, Fenris, Samos, amongst others, and of course, Varg was one of those people, was a very vocal person that kind of didn't like the way the Euronymous handled the Black Circle, because he was mostly talk and not really more of an action kind of person. So, on June 6, 1992, Varg Vikernes decided to take it upon himself to go to the famous Fantop State Church in Norway and pretty much just burn it to the ground, which was the first church burning in the line of the many church burnings that we've gone in the years from 1992 to 1994 in Norway, and then of course go globally in Sweden, in Germany, parts of the UK, so on and so forth. But this was the beginning of that terror of church burnings, of course, with the Phantom State Church, which we all know that Varg was the one who started the fire. And of course, the reason that he supposedly started the fire was because he didn't like that the Christians kind of put a church on top of their monument that was, their old religion way, that the Catholic Church or the Christian Church kind of destroyed their roots, the Norwegian roots, their paganism and all that. So For him, it was mostly a way to kind of stick it up to the church that we want our religion back, we want our original roots back, and not the bullshit Christianity, Catholic kind of way that the church tried to implement on Norway. And of course, he burned the church on June 6, 1992, and it was all over the news to the point that nobody really knew why was the reason. Of course, late as time went on, of course, people thought it was because Satanists wanted to to if I can speak English right here, they wanted to burn down their church because they thought it was Satanism against religion and all that, which that wasn't really the case in Varg's perspective. But you can kind of see how Varg's perspective is kind of conflict with his own perspective if you kind of know the history of Varg and how he contradicts himself. But regardless of that, so this happens, and of course, Varg had the brilliant idea to put this as the album cover of his first EP called Aske, which is a compilation of 3 songs. I think the last song is close to 10 minutes in length, which it's a in terms of musically this EP is very influential in the Norwegian black metal sound and in black metal in its own. But as an album cover when it was released, a lot of people, and of course especially Euronymous and all those people, was kind of getting paranoid because he was expecting that the police were literally at his doorway because of course the Black Circle, and then what happened of course with Faust a couple of years later, and of course the infamous killings that he did, and of course how it all ended. But regardless, I'm getting ahead of myself. But this was something that Varg had the brilliant idea to put as the album cover, and he had this guy by the name of, I remember his name, just let me check my notes, under the name of Arremundola, to take the photos. That way he could send them to somewhere in Sweden, have them developed, and kind of bring them back to Norway. That way the police wouldn't suspect of that he was the one behind the church burnings, which eventually the police found out that Varg was involved with the church burnings and many others, maybe 2 to 3 more on like the myths that he was involved in like 10 to 15 church burnings. Those were after what happened in Euronymous and Varg and all that. But this album cover right up the gate, like if you show it to a person of faith, a person who is a well believing in Christ and Christianity, which if you are, good for you. Hopefully that's make you become a better person. But if you show it to this a really person or a priest, if you show this album cover to them, they're gonna think it's the most blasphemous thing they've ever seen in their life, of a church being burned. Which I do see their point. Like, I'm not a really religious person, even me, which I was born and raised a Catholic, even though the last time I went to church was years ago. I still find it shocking that somebody was able to burn down a church and take a photo and put it as your album cover, which to me that's kind of fucked up. Not as small as fucked up as you are on with John of the Black Hearts, which we haven't seen that video, go see it. But regardless of that, the album was released, the vinyl was released, and on the vinyl, the first pressings of the album, it actually came with like a little lighter, which I'm going to try to put a photo somewhere. Came with like a little lighter, which if you ever try to find a copy of that vinyl with the lighter, good fucking luck. If you have a big ass wallet in your bank, good for you, buy it. But for me, as a CD collector, as not much of a vinyl person, I wouldn't buy the vinyl. Maybe it's a historical piece, maybe, but I'm not gonna spend hundreds of dollars, close to $1,000, to buy a vinyl that might not even be playable, just to have the vinyl and the freaking lighter, which lighter is kind of cool. But again, I'm not gonna spend $1,000 plus to just have it. I mean, if it was a CD, even though the CD goes for amounts even close to that range. But thankfully, as the years went by, they kind of re-released the Asking EP, including with the Burzum Subtitle debut years later. But sometimes you want to have like the EP by itself. But this album cover, like I mentioned before, it started the wave of the infamous church burns in Norway. And of course, it's still one of those things that if you see the interview we did from some of the guys from Blood Red Throne who were actually they were there during the time. I think even Bolt, when we talked to Bolt from Blood Red Throne, that he was in middle school. I think it was in elementary or middle school, that when he was watching this in the news, like his parents were telling him to stay away from kidnappers and Satanists, and of course, a lot of people thought that the people burning the church burnings were legit Satanists, which later church burnings, they some of them were, but the initial church burnings, of course, with Varg, and then later on with Euronymous and Faust, it wasn't really that was the point of the church burnings. But regardless, this album cover, it's one of those album covers that still haunts some people, especially if you're in Norway, especially if you lived through that church burning, especially if you were during that time in 92 a person who would go to that church regularly on your weekly Sunday. And thankfully that church has now been reconstructed after the church burning, and hasn't been burned down. Thank God it hasn't been burned down ever since, because, of course, the last event, if someday happens that a church burns down and they find that a metalhead burned the church, it's going to be a reflection upon us metalheads who aren't do that kind of shit, and try to keep a good name for metal and metalheads. That way we don't have to be fucked up. Kind of like when the Notre Dame church was burning, my initial reaction was like, "Oh God, somebody burned the fucking church." Thankfully, it was a accident. I think it was a crew accident that the church started to burn on fire. And I think like a natural cause, which that was a good thing for that, but a bad thing that the Notre Dame church burned down. But regardless, this album cover, to me, like, it's up there in terms of like controversial, because like I mentioned before about what happened in Norway, the Phantom State Church being burned down. Somebody had the balls like Varg to actually take the picture and put it on cover, kind of saying to the people, "Yeah, I burned down the church." Not really saying it, but kind of implying to it, which I mentioned before. Eventually, we found out Varg was the one who burned down the church by himself, and of course, it has gone down in myth and history of, that initial church burning was almost kind of the beginning of the end of the Norwegian black metal scene, and what happened afterwards, of course, with, like I mentioned before, with Faust, and of course Euronymous, and eventually Euronymous' death and Varg's imprisonment. And it's one of those album covers that to this day, I don't know what the hell Varg was thinking of doing. But that does it for the video, guys. I hope you guys really enjoy this new video. Like I mentioned before, I'm gonna try my best to kind of bring you guys more videos in the future, more controversial albums. I'm planning on doing my latest CD collection update. I bought a couple of CDs there and there, not a lot, but I still want to show them eventually in the future video. But regardless, hopefully you guys really enjoy this new controversial album series. Let me know down in the comments what you think of it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, US bang. Follow me on my Instagram, follow me on my Twitter. Like I mentioned before, there's an album you want me to talk about, let me know down in the comments. No matter how disgusting, brutal, fucked up album cover it is, let me know down in the comments. I really want to hear you all guys' opinion about it. And like I mentioned before, hope you guys still stay safe. And until next time, stay metal.